Good evening, everybody. My name's Andres Teresa. We'll just give everybody a few minutes to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, good evening, everybody. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm just going to introduce myself real quickly here, and then I'm going to pass it to Marlon from DPNR. So my name is Andres Teresa with Watershed Consulting. So we're working on a watershed management plan for the Dorothea Watershed, which includes Hull Bay. So we're working on this project on behalf of DPNR, and tonight is an informational meeting, a town hall meeting, to give the community time to get briefed on what the project is and what we've done so far, and what our next tasks are for this project. Ultimately develop a watershed management plan for Dorothea Bay. So with that, I'd like to pass it to Marlon to just give some initial words on the project. So Marlon.
Thank you, Andres. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. As Andres mentioned, my name is Marlon Hibbert, and my apologies. My push-ups are making a noise. Sincerest apologies and forgive me. So my name is Marlon Hibbert. I am the director for the Division of Coastal Zone Management. I wanted to, on behalf of the commissioner, who is unavoidably absent this evening as he is in Washington attending the U.S. Coordinated Task Force meetings. I wanted to bring a welcome on his behalf and gratitude on his behalf, as well as the department's gratitude, to say thank you to all participants for attending the meeting and for your, I'm going to use a word that you may not have heard before, for your full participation. The word participation means you're doing it in part. So I'll introduce a new term, full participation, in this process, and I say process because today is just the beginning. Andreas and his team, who we've worked with over the past 2 years actually, in doing 8 other watershed management plans across the territory. And while we were doing those plans, we heard from our Northside community of St. Thomas that we needed to do a watershed management plan for Hull Bay. Well, Hull Bay is indeed inside the Dorothea Watershed. And so our federal partners, the Office of Coastal Management at NOAA, were very kind when we did a reprogram of one of our existing grants to amend the contract that we had with Watershed Consulting to include, and to thus, instead of going through a new process, to actually include the Dorothea Watershed in the same contract, and have them help us through this process. So we're happy that we're able to be doing so. We are excited for the community to be fully involved in the process. Today is just the kickoff. Andreas and his team will provide you with information, but we do look forward as a department to working with the community to ensuring that we have a fully involved process, a plan that reflects community concerns, that reflects community input from the start to the finish. So again, very happy to welcome you all, and we look forward to working with you, and we expect that we will have a good meeting. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you, Marlon. That was a great introduction to this project. And yeah, I would like to say, I mean, we've done a good amount of work, really just the foundation work, and had an amazing turnout already just from people, different people in the community giving us input. So it really is a time that we really do want to hear from people that live in the watershed. I've talked with several already. We've met with people on site in many different locations in the watershed. And it's really the most helpful thing to have that community input, people that are on the ground and experiencing, things in the watershed, rainfall events. It's really good to have that perspective. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run through the slides. And I'm just going to say that, the instructions today, basically, everybody at any time can use the chat function. And at the end, if you use the raise hand function, I can unmute and there'll be time for dialogue at the end if there's some question and answers. And then by, certainly after this meeting, I'm always going to be available. I'm going to provide my email and my phone number, and, at any time you can call me and give me any information that you might have, or send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. So as I was saying before, this is a project that we Watershed Consulting as a contractor are doing on behalf of DPNR. We, as Marlon was saying, we've worked on a number of different watershed management plans in the territory before this one. Some of the list on St. Thomas, we've worked on Belongo Bay, the airport, and St. Thomas Harbor. And over on St. Croix, we've done Bethlehem, Diamond, Hovensa, Long Point Bay, and Salt River Bay. So I'm going to get into kind of what, why we're doing this project and what we've kind of discovered to date. And then I'm going to talk about what some of the future tasks are going to be to really create this plan. And so just, the basic introduction for folks who may be on the call that might not really be familiar with what a watershed is. We're really talking about this common area of land that channels rainfall and groundwater to a specific point, such as a gut, and then out to the sea. So when we talk about Dorothea Watershed, we're really talking about, several different gut areas which are draining down. We have Hull Bay, which we said. We have Dorothea Bay, we have Neltyburg, and Carrot Bay. So it's several different guts that are draining down, but this whole common area, all the way from the upper reaches on Crown Mountain all the way down to the sea is the watershed, and all the major guts that flow down through that area are the receiving areas, for the water when it rains, and the groundwater collects in those guts and then eventually empties out on the sea. And so we're really looking at this ridge to reef approach for stormwater management, really looking at all these different concepts within the watershed. So this graphic here, which was developed by Coral Bay, where we've also done some work, really illustrates all the different things within the watershed that we're really interested in looking at. So you kind of look at, the hydrology, right? So there's definitely a science function to this. We're looking at infrastructure, infrastructure. I'm going to talk about that. Infrastructure is really important in any watershed. It's really important in this watershed, really, how the water gets conveyed down the mountain. So is it going by way of, roadside ditches, paved swales, low water crossings, culverts, guts, right? Catch basins, pipes, all that, conveys the water down to the outlet of the watershed. So that's really important. This graphic also shows, we as humans have developed the watershed, right? So we have homes, we have roads. And so all of those, that land use and the changes of the land use really impact how water flows. And it's not just along the coastal zone, it's everywhere within the watershed has an impact on the water quality and things like flooding. Even all highest up in the upper reaches of the watershed has an impact. So it's not just the coastal zone, it's really everywhere within the watershed. So to give you just an introduction about the Dorothea Watershed, some of the characteristics, this is really kind of the first step when we do a plan. We look at what the existing conditions are, and we use data. We analyze data to come up with some of these statistics. So, one thing is, the area of the watershed, just about 1,700 acres, and about 10% of that is actually impervious areas. When we talk about impervious area, what are we talking about? We're talking about roads, we're talking about rooftops, we're talking about driveways. So all that impervious area really has a negative influence on water quality if it's not properly managed. And so that's really what we're trying to do is better manage the impervious surfaces. This graphic here down in the lower right, this is an older graphic from the Center for Watershed Protection, but I think it's very relevant. It was done as a study to really show that as the watershed cover, impervious cover grows, so if you're looking on the bottom here, you see 10, 25, 40, 60, as that increases, the stream quality, so this would be, the gut health in this case, right? From poor to fair, it's kind of going down is what they've seen. And so as that impervious cover increases, the quality of the water within the watershed generally decreases if it's not properly managed. And where we are right now in Dorothea, right at this 10%, we're kind of, right on that track going down. So really this is it's a good opportunity at this point to really start looking at ways to better manage the runoff in the watershed so that we don't slide into, the red zone here where things are going to be impacted if they're not properly managed. Some of the other things I can point out on this graphic, so the map gut length is 15,000 feet. And noting there's several unmapped guts that we identified in the watershed. So this is really just the major gut systems that have been mapped. So there's a lot of gut length in the watershed. Highest elevation area, this is Crown Mountain right here. And as we go down in color, you can see, coming from the white, which is the upper reaches, the brown middle elevations. And then as we go down into the greens, that's all along the coastal zone. So it's a very steep watershed, not surprisingly. The high elevation change in a short amount of time, and that really factors into the amount of runoff that would be seen in the watershed. So the steeper the watershed, the more runoff generally. So this is just a graphic that shows some of the data that we use to analyze the watershed conditions. So this is a land use land cover type map, and you can see that down in the lower left is really just a graphic of the entire watershed. But then when we look at these boxes, so if we just take this box, for example, this is on the upper left, this is a zoom in of that box. And you can see really there's a lot of green here and the gut travels right through the green. So that's really indicating that there's a really favorable stretches of undisturbed areas where these guts flow through. And I would just say, you know, from my personal observations in this watershed versus other watersheds that I've seen where we worked on the south side of the island, there is a lot of areas that are very well intact and doing really well, where there's guts that are in really good naturalized conditions. There's water flow in the guts. There isn't a lot of erosion. So they really look in good condition. I wouldn't say absolutely pristine, but I would say good condition. So I think that, you know, as part of our plan, what we want to do is identify, call out some of these different areas where there is this really good intact buffering that's going on, and say that, you know, those are areas that really need to be looked at for conservation in the future. You know, if we want to protect the water quality, we need to maintain where there is good buffering that currently exists. We want to maintain that in the future. You know, that's an important piece. There are, you know, already some pretty highly developed areas of the gut. This is just one example right here above Hull Bay, where there is a lot of residential development already. So it's really just a mix of the different land uses that we have currently in the watershed. So, you know, not unlike many other watersheds anywhere where we're working, where there are people and watersheds, there are problems, you know, and human disturbance causes issues. And, you know, and one of the problems in this watershed is disturbed land or poorly planned development. So unstabilized land surfaces associated with construction, best management practices, which are really not functioning well or are not installed right to begin with. You know, a lot of land surface when, you know, it's not raining, really not creating any issues, but, you know, when there's large storms, this is really going to result in a lot of sedimentation downstream. And that's a really important point that, you know, I think in this watershed, just among others, you know, the poorly planned development, also disturbed land is an issue, which will be highlighted in the plan. Unpaved road erosion. So I think, you know, there are certainly some pretty significant unpaved roads in this watershed. And I think that that's somewhat unique to St. Thomas and some of the other watersheds. You know, on the south side, they're more paved. There are fewer, you know, unpaved roads. Unpaved roads do contribute a lot of sediment if they're not managed properly and not constructed properly. This is just some screenshots, some photos of some examples where you get a lot of runoff from these unpaved roads. And, you know, over time, basically that sedimentation is washing away, it's washing into the guts and then ultimately out to the different bays and impacting the nearshore environment. So one of the other problem drivers in the watershed is the impervious surface itself, like I was talking about. And really the way impervious is, the reason it's a problem is because essentially it's creating hydrologic connection. So what that means is that when it rains, you know, we've really developed really good, efficient plumbing to take the water flow down these roads and really create a very efficient conduit for water flow to run from the top of the watershed all the way to the bottom. So anybody that lives in the watershed or lives anywhere on the territory doesn't need to be told that when it rains really hard, water is rushing down these roads, right? So, you know, that is a big problem because as the water flow gains energy and gains collection area as it flows down the road network, really resulting in problems downstream related to flooding, overwhelming infrastructure, and then really creating a lot of force, which is scouring out sediment, carrying that sediment into guts, carrying that ultimately down to the ocean. So that hydrologic connection is something that we're looking at pretty closely to try to disconnect some of those areas, especially, you know, really looking at some of the critical areas where we can say, you know, is there an opportunity on this corner to basically reconnect the water back to the guts? So how it had historically flowed, is there an opportunity by way of, adjusting some of the grading along the roads and creating some new conduits to basically reconnect the guts with the water flow, get the water flow back into the guts, because the guts are naturally engineered to handle the water. They have a lot of large boulder systems, and they were designed originally by nature to handle a lot of water flow. So we want to get the water flow back to the guts, and then use the guts to convey the water down to the ocean. Not only is that a better way to get the water down the watershed, but it's also the guts actually need that water to sustain the life that lives in the guts. And so we also want to reconnect the guts so that we can restore the guts for the natural water flow. So another big problem in the watershed is solid waste and wastewater. So, we look at solid waste. Solid waste is an issue everywhere. It's one of the main issues. We're really going to be documenting specific areas where we've seen, a real prevalence of solid waste dumping, illegal dumping, primarily, but it's also, just poorly managed dumpster sites where, the example here down in the lower right, this is a dumpster location, but you can see with this blue arrow, this is actually a gut. The gut actually comes directly under the dumpster area. So this is just like an example of, probably not the best location for a trash collection. So is there an opportunity to think about maybe relocating that, or at least redesigning it with some features which are going to make it less likely that stormwater runoff that comes in contact with all this waste is going to end up in the gut? That's really what we don't want. The middle picture is an example of a wastewater discharge. So, the thing that is great within Dorothea and Hull Bay is there are small wastewater plants. This is a picture here of the brass plant. Having that collection, I think, and personally, I think that's a good thing, because the on-site septic system suitability is not great in this area. So having a collection system is good. Unfortunately, some of the piping that is bringing the water, wastewater from a residence to the plant, may not be in great shape. So this is just an area where there's a wastewater problem. And so, this is a great, I would say, opportunity. I mean, all these are really opportunities. They're problems, but they're really opportunities. And so, but what we're trying to do is just shine the light on kind of the highest opportunities, the best opportunities, where we can make fixes cost effectively to improve water quality. So that's really what we're focused on doing in this plan. So infrastructure, I talked about, the infrastructure, the stormwater infrastructure. This is just a great example. I'm just going to play this little video clip right here. And you can see this was during a rain in the watershed. And it's really just an example, a small example of basically how the water flow is bypassing. There's a collection point right there, but the water flow is going right past the catch basin, and then it's flowing down overland. So it's just a simple example of, the best intention of a collection area here for the water is not functioning because it's essentially not being maintained properly. So the water can't get into that inlet, and it's going to flow somewhere else and potentially cause some problems. Not really for a storm like this, but for a much larger storm. Some of the other examples here, if we look at the upper left, this is just obviously leaves and debris do create problems, and they're always going to create problems. They have to be actively maintained, these inlet points, so that the water can actually make its way into those collection areas. And then down in the lower left, it's just an example of a culvert. All this infrastructure has a lifespan, right? And so it's going to fail eventually. And so we're trying in our plan to really highlight where the infrastructure really needs the most attention. So what we've done is we've scoured the watershed, we've gone out and we've identified all these infrastructure points and we put them in a database. And we have been making notes in terms of where we see something like this down the lower left, this failed culvert, we're making a note, and that's all going to be included in a database for somebody to pick up and hopefully use in the future to say, you know, this is really where we need to spend some money to replace some of this infrastructure. So I would say, you know, all those problems or opportunity areas really, you know, one of the big consequences is flooding, right? So this is what I was talking about with that hydrologic connection. You can see that the water flow really is going to take the path of least resistance, and it's going to come right down the road. And so, you know, disconnecting that water flow is really going to be helpful for water quality. You can see the color of this water. This is very turbid. It's carrying a lot of sediment with it. And so not only is it a high volume of water, but it's also carrying a lot of sediment and other pollutants within that water. So disconnecting is a really good thing to do. So we don't have any, I don't have any other great shots of a plume over on the north side in the watershed. So I'm just sharing some of the ones that we captured down in town on the south side last year. So, you know, you can see everybody's probably seen, you know, this turbid water after a storm, you know, so that all that turbidity, all that sediment eventually settles out, and it really does impact the nearshore environment, smothers the coral life, and, you know, ruins habitat of the critters that are living in that nearshore environment. So it, you know, it's not just a problem for the guts, but obviously it's a problem for the bay too. This is actually in the watershed, and you can see the same issue of the turbidity coming down. You know, so really this is just a very quick burst of a storm. This wasn't even really a large storm, but definitely a lot of turbidity coming down. And so, you know, that's the kind of thing that we're trying to address. The other big issue with wastewater and also improperly managed dumpsters and trash is bacteria. So everybody's probably familiar with bacteria. Fortunately, DPNR has a really robust process to sample water and create these beach advisories here. So this is just an example of a recent beach advisory from the beginning of this month, describing the sampling that occurs and where it occurs and whether or not the beaches are passing water quality standards. So, you know, monitoring is a really nice resource to have, and it's a really good thing. And, you know, really one of the goals of this plan is to really try to help reduce the number of times that, you know, these reports are saying, you know, it's not safe to swim after a rainfall, right? Because we have less bacteria and less stormwater runoff making its way to the swimming beaches. So I'm just going to talk just a little bit just about some of the technical tools that we use when we're investigating the watershed. So, you know, one of the key things that we do is we do what's called a land use analysis. And the land use analysis is done by using high resolution imagery. So really crisp imagery where we can really see a lot of detail what's going on. We use LiDAR, which is basically allows us to develop a very specific topographical map of the whole area. And so with these tools, we can develop a land use land cover data set. So this is just an example of basically digitizing the different land uses. So we are able to use our models to basically predict runoff. And, you know, we're able to do that by, you know, looking at how much, you know, driveways, how many roads, how many rooftops, other different land cover types there are in the watershed. So one of the other tools that we're using is a UAS. So we're using a drone, a mapping drone specifically to get really current and also high resolution imagery for specific points in the watershed that we're really interested in. So this is just an example, and I'll just run this video and you can see just by zooming in, how high resolution this data is. You can see that's us on the beach right there flying the drone at Hull Bay. So you can see, with this data, we can really zero in on some specific, very specific things in the watershed. And down in the lower left-hand corner of this image is a really nice stormwater feature, which is down at Hull Bay, which actually manages a lot of water from the gut that's coming down, and it's preventing a lot of sediment from actually making its way into Hull Bay. It's trapping that, and it's a really nice asset for this area. And I think that this is just an example of one thing that we really want to try to promote in the watershed and develop other areas where we can apply these types of best management practices. It's a best management practice right here. It's really really nice feature. I have a zoomed in photo of it here somewhere, I think coming up in a slide. When we talk about best management practices, I mean, this is really one of the things in our plan that how we can address uncontrolled stormwater runoff. So we're looking at applying things like road paving in certain areas where the road just continually gets washed out because it's unpaved. We're looking at upgrading infrastructure, potentially upsizing culverts so that they can pass more water in a big storm. Looking at maybe concrete water bars, bringing water from one side of the road to another. Even just stabilizing the land where there is a lot of eroded surface above a road is a best management practice. These are some examples. This is actually from down in Carrot Bay, I believe, a really nice wall system right here to kind of retain the land and hold back the erosion. Some of these other examples, these are gabions, which are these stone cages. They're metal cages, and then they're stacked on top of one another, and then they can be planted. Another really nice example from the watershed here of some stone terracing with some plants. These are great features. These are all done locally by some homeowners, but and they're small, but they really do have an impact on stabilizing the land. Some of the other examples of some larger type of best management practices. This is on the upper left. This is a rain garden or a bioretention. It's also called a bioretention area over on St. Croix. We have these chamber systems. So these are designed for underground stormwater management. So this is just a picture during construction, but these essentially get filled over. And then, a parking lot or say a playing field can go on top, and you can have a lot of stormwater management, stormwater controls occurring underneath the land. So it's just a better way to utilize space, especially when you're very constrained with space and you don't have the ability to say install a large basin where you have land to do that. You can put the stormwater underground. So on the left here is the basin that I had described in Hull Bay. So we were fortunate enough to get a tour of this by one of the landowners there. And this is it's a nice feature. I had a conversation today with the owner about it. They're getting ready to clean it out. I would say one of the things that we're really trying to do, not only controlling stormwater, but we're trying to meet some other goals which are really important on St. Thomas. And so one of those goals is water, right? So how can we use stormwater to basically capture water for use? So this is just a great example of, a way that we can, not only control stormwater and control sediment, but control water use and actually capture that water and maybe reuse it for irrigation. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about. Also, the water that comes into this basin brings with it a lot of really fine sediment. And that fine sediment is actually really good for growing. it's really good for, using as a fertile soil, especially because the soil conditions are so rocky and poor generally on St. Thomas that, having these collection areas, these things can be utilized to basically excavate that material when it starts filling up, and then utilizing it to grow plants in the future. So that's just, another thing that's being experimented with here, and I think it's just a great opportunity to possibly do this in other locations in the watershed, and kind of have, something where there's going to be more benefits than just the stormwater, but it's going to, potentially capture water that can be used, and then also provide some soil that can be used to grow plants. So on the right is just another example of a best management practice. Don't believe this is in the watershed. This is on St. Thomas. But just another example of a larger basin. So these are the types of things that we're really looking at. So, I talked about water reuse. These are some examples of some existing ponds within the watershed. So these are all within the Dorothea Watershed. And these are areas where, we're looking at, can we bring more water into these locations? Can we make them more efficient for people in the community to actually utilize for irrigation, actually have the ability to access these areas potentially, and then basically use that water as a resource. So, we're taking a hard look at where all the existing ponds and more community type cisterns are located. And we're thinking, how can we make these better? How can we expand them out to better control stormwater and to better afford, people the ability to use these for water, for irrigation. So I just described these earlier. So the chambers, I think, are very relevant on the south side of St. Thomas, where it's more urbanized and there's more limitations on doing these larger basins. So I'm not really sure that we're going to end up seeing a lot of these systems in Dorothea, because there is a little more space. We always look to using a surface basin first because it's going to be less expensive. But certainly if there is an opportunity where we don't have space, we may end up looking at these chamber systems, and hopefully we have several of these designs which are kind of moving forward, and hopefully we can see a couple of these constructed in the territory, which will just be a good kind of template for moving ahead, utilizing these technologies in other locations. So just to give everybody just a quick overview of kind of the process, what we've done so far in the watershed. So we've set up, I'm going to start in the upper left. When we look at these pink plus signs, we're looking at locations where we're visually monitoring the gut. So we've actually set up game cameras, and the game cameras are programmed to take photos when it actually rains, so that we are able to catch a very quick rainfall when we wouldn't have the ability to get out and actually view it ourselves in such a short time, because the nature of trying to monitor stormwater is it always going to happen, when you're not there, where you can't get there right away. So we have this, pretty low cost, low tech system of cameras, but they really do allow us to understand, what the guts look like, and how fast they respond when it rains. One of these, we may learn that, one gut in particular, when it rains even a small amount, there may be a huge flash of very turbid water right there, right away. And that would tell us, geez, there's an issue going on here. And that would maybe prompt us to investigate it a little further. So moving to the right here, the field assessment points, you can see all those red points. Those are all areas where we walked around in the watershed and we collected data. And we collected data on describing the type of improvement, the type of opportunity that existed in that location. And so we have all those points. And now what we're going to do is we're going to analyze all those points, and we're going to basically rank them and prioritize them. And in our plan, we're going to have a long list of projects, and we're going to have the projects which are kind of at the top of the list. in terms of the ones that are really going to benefit the community the most and provide the most benefit for water quality, flood reduction, community benefit. So just some other photos of some of the site visit work that we were doing. The government land analysis. So whenever you do these watershed plans, we also look for government lands. And so we really do that just as a way to identify areas where there's public land that really could be easiest in terms of citing one of these best management practices, because generally, you know, citing them on government land is going to be easier than going onto private land and trying to secure an easement or access or purchase for private land in order to do some type of water quality improvement. So really just by starting the project, we really look at this on our computer, on our desktop, and then kind of go from there, really see where the largest tracks are. This one happens to be right up in Dorothea Bay, is the one that really stands out. And there's a couple other smaller ones scattered around, but that's the major one in Dorothea Bay. So just to kind of give, this is my last slide. I really just wanted to say, you know, we really do value the community input on this project. And in order for it to be successful, we need the community input. And so anything where you see examples of, you know, improperly managed dumps, or sorry, just illegal dump sites where people are dumping debris and garbage that isn't a designated site, we want to know about that. We'd like to know about any erosion, so gullying, anywhere where there's just active soil erosion going on. Drainage directed down roads and away from guts, unstable areas. So we did view, there was a pretty sizable landslide that we took a look at when we were there. Since close by the wastewater plant, there's a pretty sizable landslide from one of the hurricanes. Things like that, really important. Septic leaks. So anywhere where people are visibly seeing wastewater effluent, that's a really, really good thing to know. Not only is it a public health hazard, needs to be addressed, but it's also just a way to really quickly eliminate an issue, which is, you know, really detrimental to water quality. Cloudy or just dirty water when it's raining, you know, especially cloudy or dirty water. Flooding areas, any major flooding areas, or broken or clogged infrastructure. You can email me right here, and then, you know, we can set up a meeting or whatever to discuss. I'm happy to do that. So some of the next steps, we're really going to be assessing those watershed priorities. I talked about all the data that we collected. We're really working on analyzing that data right now. We're putting all that data into our modeling. And so the modeling allows us, using computer tools, to really understand how much runoff is occurring and then kind of design mitigation strategies around that. So that's, we're working on the modeling. We're going to be working on designing out 2 of the top practices are going to be part of our plan. So we're going to be starting work on the engineering designs of those 2 projects. And then we're going to be creating the overall plan. This is just the cover sheet from the St. Thomas Harbor plan. We're going to be creating that entire plan. And all this work is going to be occurring within the next several months. So we're going to have a final plan, you know, I would say this summer. We're going to have a final plan delivered, and that plan is going to then be available for the public as a resource, and it's going to be used as a guide to basically guide the next several years of management within this area, within Dorothea. So with that, if anybody has any questions or any feedback, you know, just some things to think about. You know, what are the areas that you would like to see managed? Are there particular areas that you're concerned about, or just really interested in protecting in Dorothea? And then what issues do you see related to water quality and flooding? So if anybody has anything to share now, I'd love to hear about it, but if not, you know, definitely reach out to me afterwards as well. So Ryan, you should be able to.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, my question is regarding the creation of storm water basins and their integration with guts. And this is more of a like, how would the storage of water, like at the bottom of guts where it's appropriate, be designed, and maybe that's something that you could incorporate into your overall plans.
Definitely that, like the one example that I was showing, that is a basin that is designed at the bottom of a gut, basically before that gut would be emptying into Hull Bay. And I think that a lot of times that is a really, the bottom of the gut like that is a really good location to have this type of feature for sure. And so we have a couple locations like that. So we would be, we've identified those areas. Those potentially might be one of the top sites that we might end up designing in our plan. But the thing is, by the time the water gets all the way down to the bottom, there's a lot of water too. So, and sometimes we don't really have the available space to be able to make the basin as big as it should be to manage the expected volume of water. So I think that in those cases, we have to look up the guts as well to try to find, some other types of practices that we can install to limit the amount of water that's actually making its way all the way down to the bottom, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I think my concern is that so much of the time when development is taking place next or near to the gut, there is such a heavy prohibition on any activity around the gut that it makes me curious of how we could design something appropriate for stormwater storage that integrates with the gut without damaging its overall ecology, I guess, really.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point. And I think the answer is that there are ways to do what's called an offline type system. And an offline type system means that instead of placing, one of these practices in the gut and destroying, that section of the gut in the process, you could basically design some type of a diversion within the gut that would take stormwater flow out of the gut and then into a basin which is sited somewhere away from the gut. And you could design it such that the lower flow, like the more normal flows, would continue to flow through the gut. So you wouldn't be directing all the water out of the gut, but what you would do is just provide a bypass for when the water got up to a certain level in the gut, the overflow would spill over into one of these control basins, which could be located, away from the gut. So you're actually not placing it in the gut. Does that make sense?
Sure does. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Andreas, if I may.
Please.
So following on Mr. Weishart's question, I think a good suggestion, but potential issue and potential opportunity is that often some of these waterways, these guts are on private property. And there may be interest in the private property owner to develop the property, but the gut is in such a location that you could say unavoidably it has to be impacted. One of the challenges we face is that when for example, if such a project comes in through the department and there is a section of our code that states you shouldn't be removing vegetation within 30 feet of the center and 25 feet of the edge of any gut system. It's often the case where that causes, one would say, hardship on the property owner because they have to avoid the waterway. But also, if a suggestion is made to provide an intervention that would still keep the integrity and functioning of the system, that cost becomes prohibitive to the property owner, which in turn, if they do get a permit, usually, if not properly followed, it's usually not built to the specifications and or then impacts the integrity of the particular system, causing way more problems downstream in the long run. So there are some potential challenges, but there are some potential opportunities. It's just the community, I think, also needs to understand that these are costly interventions. The cost for design, the cost for implementation is going to likely drive up the cost of any project, public or otherwise, in these areas. So I just wanted to make that point that yes, we have received, subdivision plans where, there are plans for a large culvert in a waterway. It is not our primary priority to impact the gut in any way, but in order for a private property owner to access a portion of the property, they have to cross this gut. And so the engineering intervention is usually way more costly than probably even what they're going to put on the other side of the gut. And so they put up their hand and say, hey, economic hardship, I'm sorry, I can't put that intervention in place, which leads to a larger community impact, a larger system impact. And that is something that within the department, we have to make decisions that are not always, I would say, popular. So I just wanted to share that with the community.
Yeah, thanks, Marlon. There are two other chat questions I'd like to respond to. I think one was from Bridget. Many of the beaches are documented sea turtle nesting beaches. Is there any part of the modeling that takes into account beach washouts and damaging their nests? I would think that anything that all the interventions that we would be talking about would hopefully be reducing some of those erosive flows. And so, we're not specifically modeling the erosion specific to sea turtle nesting. However, I would say that, any of the interventions that we're looking at would be, looking to reduce those erosive flows that ultimately end of the beach. So I think that it would be, beneficial for that issue, I guess, once we get to that point. Secondly, the second question is about the Brassview effluent plant. Does it pollute all water to the west when there's heavy rains? I can't really answer that question per se. I know that, during our site visits, we were accompanied by some folks that were knowledgeable about the wastewater system of that plant, and that, the plant actually has, it's being monitored, and I guess the data was looking good, is what I heard, but I haven't looked at any of the data specifically, so I can't really directly answer that question. But to the second point, if there are rainfall records from Carrot Bay from 1977, all the rain records, we would definitely like to have that data. So however I can get that from you, if you could just send me an email, looks like Archie, I would love to have it. So please do connect with me about that. And then I think another question that just popped in, the presentation covered paved roads as a contributing problem. Dirt roads are also a problem for different reasons. Is there a way to cover a significant amount of dirt roads with something besides concrete so they're covered but not impervious? What are examples of this covering? I think that's a great question. There are definitely technologies out there that allow a road surface not to behave like an impervious surface. There are things like different geotextiles, different types of surfaces that will allow the water to actually come into and pass through the roadbed. the unfortunate thing is on St. Thomas, with the soils being such that they are, there really is not a good opportunity, in my opinion, to use those types of surfaces. I think it's better to try to reduce the amount of impervious surface. You know, you've probably seen things like double track, where you have just the pavement treads under the tires, which are concrete, but then in the middle you have, say, a grass strip up the middle. You know, that's a really good example of a way to minimize the amount of impervious surface. So, you know, thinking about that, that's really the best solution, I think. And unfortunately, even though a dirt road is not paved, it still behaves like an impervious surface. So it's acting just like really a paved road, where the water is going to be running off directly, and it's just that it's going to be carrying a lot more sediment and debris as compared to a paved road. So it's almost a worse problem in that sense. So I appreciate everybody's time. If nobody has any other comments or feedback, I think that concludes the presentation for tonight. And I would just encourage you again to reach out to me, and definitely really appreciate everybody's attendance here tonight and the feedback that we've received. We're really looking forward to developing this plan and you know, having it be a real actionable plan for the watershed moving ahead. I'm really excited to be able to do that on behalf of DPNR. So thank you very much.
Andreas, a hand came up, Mr. Paul Kalu, I believe.
Say again, Marlon?
A hand came up. Mr. Paul Kalu put his hand up.
Oh, I see. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, Paul, can you please speak?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question or to your comment, or the question pertaining to the Brassview wastewater treatment plant, that is polished water and it's monitored by the EPA. At least it used to be 10 years ago, when I worked for them. And that outfall is their outfall is outside of where the waves break at the Hull Bay beach. I mean, it's really far out.
Oh,
Just for your information, the pollution, or a question and another comment. We have a 30 to 40% slope right across from the Department of Agriculture, and there's a couple hundred, you know, different animals, livestock that they have, pigs, goats, ducks, and all kinds of other animals in there. Did you guys observe that or look at that, or have you, or do you plan to do any studies on how that affects the waterways right there at the bridge?
yeah, I know, I believe I know where you're talking about, actually, and I think that would be factored into our you know, in terms of like the land use analysis. Yes. So I would, if we could maybe connect, Paul, I'd be interested to talk to you a little bit more about that when I had the screen, and we could, you know, kind of take some notes. And then also I'm interested to learn a little bit more about that outfall, because I was not aware that the outfall is well out in the bay, like you were saying.
Correct. We did a PowerPoint presentation at one time. The Department of Agriculture was proposing to add, you know, actually more livestock to the area. And me, myself, and, you know, several members of the community were against that because of the poor job that they're doing with the area and the effects that the waste from the livestock is having, you know, and right there in the bridge area. I mean, a lot of the crayfish, it used to be a very, you know, there's a lot of crayfish and life and birds and so forth right there. You can go down and, you know, catch them and put them in fish tanks and so forth, and they're all gone right now. And I'm pretty sure, you know, the waste from the livestock has affected that adversely. Yeah.
Okay.
And we have some the waves and what happens, you know, when it gets down into the Dorothea area, and how it spins back into the Hull Bay area because of the wave action once it gets out, once it breaks out during heavy rains, that, you know, you have that blowout, and where it ends up, you know, in the Hull Bay area, and how it affects, you know, the shoreline with different types of disease. So we'll to get up with you and talk about that. That'd be good. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll send you an email if you don't mind, and then we can connect on that.
Sure, that'd be great. Another question too, just to put it out there. I mean, maybe we can push for this, guys. Observations after Hurricane Irma and then having Maria right and back of its heels. A lot of the head walls after Hurricane Irma became inundated with sediment. And it would be nice if we had standby crews, contracted to clean up, so that in case we have another windstorm or heavy rain event right after, a storm, we can get things cleaned up. A lot of guts were formed unnaturally because those head walls were blocked. The water didn't have a place to go, and it would just run down the mountain and create new guts and so forth because like I said, the head walls were inundated. I'm asking for like a similar plan to like what we do with WAPA, where they contract workers, before we get into hurricane season, and have something in place. Just being proactive instead of reactive is, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
If that makes sense. I don't know if that's something that we can push for.
When you say head walls, you mean the culverts?
Correct, exactly. The guts.
Yeah.
And so we had that down in the Hull Bay area too, just above Brian's Bar. There was a construction site. Irma came, it just blocked everything up. And up till this day, they cleaned some of it, quite a bit of it, but I mean, it remained in that condition for some time, to where the road eroded as you go down towards the bar off to the side. Whatever little bit of water that was flowing off of the road, that impervious surface, it just increased. I mean, it's a big ditch there right now on both sides.
Yeah.
So just some observations from after the storm, and also offering a solution, what we can do to prevent that from happening again.
Mhm. That's great. Thank you for that feedback. Appreciate that.
Yep.
Okay, well, with that, I think we'll wrap it up for this evening. Again, thanks very much, everybody, and stay tuned for more information on our plan. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Marlon.
Your time and effort.